The Sega Saturn, my favorite gaming console of all time. I'm not even exaggerating, of all the consoles I own, it gets the most play. This 32-bit juggernaut boasts some of the finest arcade ports ever produced, and not just from Sega. It had fantastic third-party support from the likes of industry giants such as Capcom, SNK, and Atlas, as well as a whole slew of console exclusives, many of which never received a stateside release. Yeah, the Saturn may have been successful in Japan and Europe, but it was a failure here in North America, placing a distant third behind Sony's PlayStation and Nintendo 64. 20 years have passed since the Saturn's surprise launch way back in May of 1995, yet players are still fascinated by its rushed birth and untimely death. Prior to Saturn's release, Sega had flooded an already crowded market with hardware that would not only fail to live up to players' expectations, but leave a sour aftertaste on the palates of consumers and retailers alike. Then we had all the hype surrounding Nintendo 64 as well as the mounting interest in Sony's PlayStation. Consoles that were dazzling the community with incredible 3D graphics that made the Saturn look underpowered and dated. The Saturn was capable of producing impressive 3D visuals of its own, though it wasn't readily apparent in the beginning. Much of this had to do with how she was built. While the Saturn was technically impressive for the time, rocking 8 processors, 2 of which were dedicated to its CPU, this upped manufacturing costs and made it that much harder to program games. Few developers would ever take advantage of all that power. Regardless, Saturn was in high demand, and Sega decided to exploit it as best they could. In my opinion, this led to their first serious blunder. Saturn was set to launch in North America on September 2nd, 1995, or Saturn Day. This is what Sega told the general public and most retailers up until its surprise release on May 11th that same year. Sega rushed 30,000 units to select retailers with only a handful of games and a whopping $400 price tag. Granted, that's fairly common nowadays. Back then, it made our collective wallets cry foul. A few retailers didn't even receive the Saturn on launch day, like Best Buy, Walmart, and KB Toys. The latter went so far as to drop Sega products entirely in retaliation. Damn! Sega's marketing strategy took a bizarre turn, to say the least. Early print ads were just weird. Take this one for example. Yeah, it's Ice Cube. Why is Ice Cube in a Sega ad, and why is he so angry? Wait, what? Don't judge a package by its wrapper? It's like they're saying, hey, don't judge our shit because we went NWA over LL Cool J. There were variations on the same theme, like this one here. Oh, it's out there all right. I found them amusing, though some consumers felt they were too abstract, too risque, or in poor taste. Remember, the World Trade Center had been attacked in 1993, so this may have been a touch much in 96. If you thought that shit was bananas, you haven't seen the TV ads. The one I remember best is Theater of the Eye.
Rods and cones report to the orbital socket.
How nice. We're trimming the toenails. What's that?
Optic nerve. We're having a breakdown. We're having a breakdown. We're having a breakdown.
Seriously, what the fuck am I watching? As a kid, I remember thinking it was an ad for a Nickelodeon TV show. You know, like you can't do that on television. You know, for whatever reason, it reminds me of Nirvana's video for Heart-Shaped Box. Can't explain it. Once the PlayStation arrived with several phenomenal-looking launch games and $100 less than Saturn, it wasn't long before Sega felt the sting. Then came Nintendo 64 the year later, blowing our fragile little minds with Super Mario 64. By that time, Saturn had some beautiful 3D games on display, like Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop, Sega Rally Championship, Panzer Dragoon 2, and Nights into Dreams, which came with Sega's brand new 3D analog controller. Sadly, it wasn't enough to win the hearts and minds of most players stateside that were veering further and further away from arcade-like thrills toward more involving, story-driven experiences provided by Sony and Nintendo. Even after the release of Sega's Netlink, a peripheral that allowed surfing and online play with only 5 games, it did very little to improve sales. To make matters worse, Bernie Stolar, former executive vice president of SCEA, took over as chief operations officer and later president of Sega of America. As he had done with PlayStation early on, Stolar opposed the localization of many Japanese role-playing games, shooters, and fighters, thinking they wouldn't appeal to players here in the US. Stolar would add fuel to the fire at E3 in 1997, stating, and I quote, "The Saturn is not our future." Look, I get that the console was troubled from day one and that nothing lasts forever. Still, the Saturn had a lot of life left in it. Rather than playing to the unit's strengths, as well as providing gamers with more varied experiences, Bernie decided to 86 the whole thing. When you're given a sinking ship with express orders to fix it, you don't make the hole bigger. That's precisely what he did. Like his predecessor, Stolar had little to no faith in the Saturn and wanted it axed. The rest, as they say, is history. Thankfully, gamers have come to appreciate this sweet machine in recent years. Aside from all the stellar arcade ports and bitchin' exclusives, it's very import friendly. Yeah, no need to modify your unit, just plug this bad boy in and all those games we were denied are within our grasp. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let us get back to the Saturn itself. This is the Model 1. It's big, black, and beautiful. Like the Sega CD before it, Saturn has a built-in battery backup for the internal clock and save data. Now, the battery will die eventually, wiping out your memory in the process. Fear not, we have the memory cartridge with several thousand blocks of space, which is a good thing since Virtua Fighter 2, for example, uses well over 100 just to save your stats. Why? The controller, like the console, is a bit hefty. Believe it or not, I dig it. I have big hands anyway, so this serves me just fine. Admittedly, the D-pad's kind of funky. It's really hard with sharp edges that wear on your thumb during heated sessions. Also, the shoulder buttons are thin and spongy. It doesn't feel like they're clicking, but they do work. Americans didn't take to the new controller, leading Sega to release the Japanese version here. I won't lie, it's a better controller. It's a tad smaller and more refined. The D-pad is comparable to Genesis, and the shoulder buttons feel more like triggers, giving me that satisfying click when pressed. That being said, the UFO is my personal preference. Same great D-pad, bigger buttons, righteous triggers, and my absolute favorite analog stick. Thank you very much. I'll be honest, one of the reasons I love the Saturn is pure nostalgia. The 32X and Sega Saturn were the first Sega consoles I purchased for myself. On my 15th birthday, I bought my own Genesis, Sega CD, 32X, and Saturn, brand fucking new, for $20 a piece at Toys R Us. Here they were dead, yet I wanted nothing else. It was my very own Sega collection. Best 80 bucks I ever spent. Of course, the main reason I adore this big black box is the incredible library. Far too many to list in one video, though I will single out one franchise in particular,